Hey everyone, I'm Rob. I am an SRE at a company called Spring Health. Who here has heard of Spring Health? All right, maybe a couple. So we're a mental health benefit company. We're based out of the United States. And so I kind of stumbled into SRE. I came from the software engineering side, and the first sort of like large initiative thing I took on was SLO adoption. And so that's what we'll talk about today. And after submitting my talk, I kind of wish I would have added sort of this sort of like subtitle. It's Run, Walk, Crawl, or How We Failed Our Way to SLO Readiness, or looking back, how we'd think about this endeavor in hindsight. And so what we're going to work on today is we're going to walk through the journey, and we're going to create a checklist. And these will be the guideposts or the checkpoints I wish we would have had when we started this journey. And so kind of a beautiful thing about this conference is that we all bring our stories, our lessons, et cetera, kind of from like our own unique perspective. And so kind of based on the fact it didn't seem like a lot of people had heard of Spring Health, I want to really like set the scene before we get started. And so who are we, right? As you might have guessed it, right, we are an SRE team. But first I kind of want to gauge our reality versus everyone else here. So like who, right, has completely like self-healing autonomous systems and just hang out on the beach all day? Anybody? No? And I'm guessing you also have like completely like clear calendars, right? Like no changing priorities, like anyone? And if you are, like, I'll give you my resume. No? Okay. So yeah, so kind of like everyone else here, right? We are a resource-constrained SRE team. And the where, right? Where do we work? So I said I work at Spring Health based on definitions I found online and sort of some of the internal metrics that I shared here. I think we're probably a hyper-growth startup. And so we are a resource-constrained SRE team and a hyper-growth startup. And what are we working on? As you might have guessed, SLO adoption. So SLO adoption is fundamentally a socio-technical problem. And I feel pretty awesome saying that at a conference talk. Sometimes even throw that around at meetings internally just to feel like extra super cool. But I've really come like through this SLO adoption process to appreciate what socio-technical really means. And I'd even argue that this is really more of a socio than a technical problem. And I know what you might be thinking, like, has this guy actually read Alex Hidalgo's book? Specifically chapter 9, probability and statistics. And no, I haven't, I'll get back to that. So there is sort of a technical side, right? There is a technical side to this work. However, for all intents and purposes, right, we'll focus on the socio side. So setting the scene, we are a resource-constrained SRE team and a hyper-growth startup adopting SLOs, which is a socio problem. And so the start of our journey. So this is just before I joined Spring Health and kind of like where we were at, right? So actually the speaker right before me, Laura, she had this wonderful talk, I think it was 2 years ago, about the cultural transition from startup to enterprise. And I'm worried now because she's sitting right there. But she talked about how startups were many times default dead versus default alive. And I think this really explained how Spring Health was, right? Everybody was just shipping features. There wasn't a lot of thought about technical debt or reliability, but we basically survived. And kind of where we would be based on the reliability maturity model is sort of somewhere between absent and reactive. And so obviously this hit a point where it wasn't going to scale anymore. Our foundation was pretty weak. Our operational strategies weren't really working. We had this technical debt, which was like ceiling high. And so we built a platform team and started hiring them out. And this is when I joined the company. And a beautiful thing that also happened is we started bringing in folks who'd seen sort of the other side of the reliability maturity model, right? Folks from places like DocuSign, Amazon, and Microsoft. And they started asking these types of questions, like, can we bake in SLOs from the very beginning? And so I promised you a checklist, and here's the checklist, right? So at this point in our journey, we had basically one thing, which is we'd adopted and committed to an observability platform. And I'm not going to say we had perfect metrics. I'm not going to say we had like end-to-end logs or like anything like that. We had an APM platform. And it was just good enough that folks who knew about observability-driven development were saying things like, hey, can you show me a log for that? Or like, hey, maybe you should have a dashboard. And so this was our first attempt. We're like, okay, we're going to do this SLO thing, right? Because you only really need two things for SLOs, right? You need an SLI, which is a metric emulating user experience, and you need a threshold. And so like I just said, we have metrics. So yeah, let's just like, get started. So what we did is a few of my teammates, they attended virtually SLO-Conf, shout out to SLO-Conf. And we also had a couple of different platforms we were trying. The APM we were using at the time had SLO features, and then also we were trying out Noble 9. And so my manager created a document. He laid out all of our different services, and we're like, okay, we're going to sprint forward and do this SLO thing. We tagged in the teams, and lo and behold, we had our first SLO. Super exciting. Of course, this came from the platform team, which I just said was saturated with people who had kind of already seen this happen. Not every team was like that. Some teams straight up didn't have any metrics. And other teams were like, okay, yeah, I mean, this SLO thing's interesting, but like, I don't have time for that, right? I don't have time, I don't understand. Like, I'm not just gonna do reliability for the sake of reliability. Like, who does that, right? And so we failed. And this is where I'm gonna take a quick step back and just say, I am creating this checklist in hindsight. I'm connecting the dots as we go here. This by no means was how it played out. Spring Health wasn't a company that like was created to like be the shining, city on the hill of SLOs, right? And so these all came from other initiatives throughout time. And so, as I said, like one of the main issues we had here was that there wasn't really a good sense of nominal. And so even though the platform team was like, okay, I don't know, like a P90, query time of less than 5 seconds makes sense for maybe an SLO, right? It wasn't actually tied to any like sort of user-centric behavior. And so we didn't really know what normal was, and so a lot of things we came up with didn't make sense. And the second thing is we didn't really have a good sense of ownership, and so when we tried to like say, hey, your team should go do this SLO thing, they were able to just like kind of shoo us away and say, go back to your little cave. And so over time, there was initiatives that went forward, and one of these was our quality of service meeting. So every week, every Wednesday, every team comes together. They have their dashboards. They say, okay, last week we were doing this week we're doing this. And this is kind of where we gain a sense of what normal looked like. We'd also talk about postmortems and incidents, and it's just like a really great learning process. And so we have our second item on our checklist. And so then this time, we weren't quite sprinting forward, but we were speed walking right back into SLOs. We're like, we're gonna do this. We created a document. We signed it to people. We tagged them all in. And something awesome happened. A non-platform team had like a full breadth of SLOs, right? And so did we start cheering? We did. However, we looked a little bit closer, and it turned out that a lack of a standard meant we were kind of talking like two different languages. And at the end of the day, SLOs, right, are communication tools, and if you're not kind of all speaking the same language, they kind of aren't very effective. And furthermore, without any standard, a lot of teams again, like didn't really know what they were doing. And so they tried, but ultimately we had set them up for failure. And so again, this failed. And yeah, as I said here, really the fundamental issue here was we had no standards, so teams were speaking different languages. We had no process, so the teams who hadn't seen this before had no idea what they were doing. And so this is where I jump into the story. I was a software engineer. I'm like, oh, this SRE stuff sounds really cool. And I did the thing that maybe some people do. I tried to convince my boss I should be an SRE, so I came up with an initiative that I gave the name MOP, Monitoring, Observability, and Performance. I called myself a MOP head. I created a triangle where engineering excellence was like at the top of it. And all that goofiness aside, I sat down with my manager. We agreed the first thing to do would be to create a foundation of SLOs. Oops. And so I was pumped. I'd spent many years sort of doing these SRE things. I didn't know there's like a whole field dedicated to it. So I was like super excited, and we're gonna crawl forward and figure this thing out. However, back to setting the scene, right? We're a resource-constrained SRE team at a hypergrowth startup. Turned out right when I joined the infra-ops/SRE/DevOps team, as it works at startups, we're actually doing a huge infrastructure migration. And so even though I join our stand-ups with questions like, what is a Terraform? Who is a Kubernetes? Like, CRD what? Apparently I was like at least moderately useful, and so they're like, okay, stop that SLO thing and help us with the migration. And so we failed again. Initiatives like these, like if you don't have somebody just like dedicated to it, they kind of just grind to a halt. And so once the migration was finished, I sat down with my manager again. He's like, okay, like this time it's gonna be a roadmap initiative item. Like this time we're like actually gonna do this. And so I read the books, most of the books, chapter 9, still haven't got there yet. I wrote this like super long primer on how we were going to think about reliability at Spring Health. There's this super awesome talk by Dave Renson called Less Risk Through Greater Humanity. And it's just like the way he frames reliability, I think just like makes a whole ton of sense. I mean, there's a lot of other talks out there, but that one's super awesome. I created overview of like how we're going to do SLOs. I created like templates. I started getting on people's calendars. We started meeting. I met with them for like a few days in a row, or a few weeks in a row, like for an hour a week. And I'm like, okay, what we're gonna do is we're just gonna like go through this whole process together. And it was awesome. We had some teams who started having SLOs, right? And these started showing up at our quality of service meetings. And so instead of them showing up with, their dashboard of like 60 graphs and like going through full speed and saying everything looks good, they had things that were actually communicable, and it was super awesome. And on top of that, our C-suite started to buy in. So our CTO, we have an on-site once a year. We're a fully remote team. And so we were given the opportunity to do a workshop on SLOs, which we're only given an hour. So I don't know if anyone's ever done this workshop. An hour is not that long. And so we did the speed version of what an SLO is, and about half the company went through it, and it was super awesome. Now, this is not the point in the talk where I'm like, and we use error budgets and alerts, and it's super awesome and fast rate, slow burn, like all those things. No, like we're still figuring this out, but like things are starting to take hold. Like it's really a beautiful thing to see cultural changes start to work. And so as an example, something very recently, so every holiday season, right, is usually just before huge spikes in traffic for our service. And so we read the SRE book, right? 70% of incidents are caused by code changes, right? So we're like, well, if there's no code changes, right, there's gonna be no incidents. And so, right, so every holiday season we would have a code freeze. However, as the company grows, as there's more engineers, these become more and more expensive. And so we're like, well, can we use error budgets, right? Like, can we use SLOs, like these things we just invested all this time in doing? And yeah, we'll see if this works out better. And so in summary, right, together we walked through our journey and we created this checklist. And if you kind of step back and sort of like abstract things, right, there's really 4 steps. The first step is basic observability. The second step is an understanding of normal. The third step is a concept of ownership. And the fourth step is somebody with projected time to drive this all forward. And I'd even argue that maybe this is like a generic reliability initiative framework, right? And to just make sure I'm not like completely BSing something just to sound good at a conference talk, I look back at a couple initiatives we did. So one being socio, so creating sort of a rollback first mentality at our org. One being technical, right-sizing resources. And it turns out we actually had all 4 of these things before we got started. And so in summary, right, we were a resource-constrained, hyper-growth startup, and doing reliability initiatives was really hard, right? Like, these can be ambiguous. These can be all the way across the org. Like, we only have so much time. We just spent 3 months convincing people we should do the thing. And so ultimately, right, this framework gives us a better chance for success. Now, success is not going to be guaranteed, but at the end of the day, right, nothing's really guaranteed. And so I'd like to say thanks. I'd also like to say, as somebody who's like relatively new to the field, conferences like this are just such a great learning opportunity. And so it's been super cool to hopefully give something back that somebody else finds useful. So thank you.